in mental health. We would like to start by thanking our presenters and panelists this evening, Patrick J. Kennedy, Stephen Fried, Jonathan Eig, and Tonie Dreher, whose amazing collaboration made this special event possible. And Profiles in Mental Health Courage portrays the dramatic journeys of a diverse group of Americans who have struggled with their mental health. In the book, you'll meet people of all ages, professions, and backgrounds, sharing their intimate personal stories, sometimes shocking and always revealing. We also meet those trying to help them, parents, friends, siblings, spouses, therapists, bosses, doctors, and more. The book takes an unflinching look at experiences and insights that inspire connection, empathy, and action, all needed to support wellness. So we thank you all for joining us for this inspiring dialogue about mental health. And before we get into the program, just a little bit about our presenters and panelists. Patrick J. Kennedy, during his time in Congress, was the lead author of the landmark Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, federal parity law, which requires insurers to cover treatment for mental health and substance use disorders, no more restrictively than treatment for illnesses of the body. As the founder of the Kennedy Forum, he now unites advocates, policymakers, and business leaders to advance evidence-based practices and policies in mental health and addiction. In 2023, the Kennedy Forum launched the Alignment for Progress, a movement to align leaders from across industries and across the aisle to transform our mental health and addiction systems. He currently serves as co-chair of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention's Mental Health and Suicide Prevention National Response to COVID-19, and is the co-chair of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Behavioral Health Integration Task Force. Stephen Fried, an award-winning journalist and best-selling author who teaches at Columbia University and the University of Pennsylvania. He's the author of 6 nonfiction books, including Rush, Appetite for America, Thing of Beauty, Bitter Pills, and The New Rabbi, and co-author with Patrick Kennedy of 2 mental health books, A Common Struggle and Profiles in Mental Health Courage. He's a 2-time winner of the National Magazine Award and has written for Vanity Fair, GQ, Glamour, and Philadelphia Magazine, where he has also served as editor-in-chief. Jonathan Eig, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of King: A Life. He's the author of 6 books, 4 of them New York Times bestsellers. The New York Times hailed King as the definitive biography of Martin Luther King Jr. The book was awarded the New York Historical Society's 2024 Barbara and David Zelaznik Book Prize, which is presented annually to the nation's best work of history or biography. King was also nominated for the National Book Award. Jonathan began his writing career at age 16, working for his hometown newspaper, the Rockland County Journal-News. He studied journalism at Northwestern University and went on to work as a reporter for the New Orleans Times, the Dallas Morning News, Chicago Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. Tonie Dreher. Miss Tonie works as a women's specialist at the Center for Alternative Sentencing and Employment Services, CASES, in New York, helping people with frequent low-level criminal charges to break the cycle and begin new lives through counseling, treatment, education, and employment services. She is especially good at her job because she spent much of her 20s and 30s needing those kinds of services, as she struggled with mental illness, substance use disorder, and homelessness. She shared her inspirational story publicly for the first time in Profiles in Mental Health Courage, and has since been featured on CBS Saturday Morning and other media outlets. So we have an absolutely exceptional panel for you this evening. And before we get into our program, we'd like to take a chance to thank our sponsors this evening, which are NAMI New York State and NAMI Rockland. And with that, I am delighted to introduce Rena Finkelstein, who is the past president and past executive director of NAMI Rockland.
Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to have NAMI New York State as a co-sponsor of this event. And representing NAMI New York State is Matthew Shapiro. I've known Matt since the days that I served on the NAMI New York State Board. NAMI New York State standing for the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York State. He's been with NAMI New York State since 2008, and he served in key positions. And currently, he's the Senior Director of Government and Community Affairs for NAMI New York State. Matt is a powerful and primary voice in the New York State Capitol for families impacted by mental illness. And I should add that I'm one of those families. I have a son with serious mental illness. Matt leads efforts to build partnerships with businesses, first responders, state agencies, and frontline workers. And among his many, many achievements, too lengthy to talk about tonight, Matt hosts NAMI New York State video series, Perspectives, and a new one, Table Talks. A frequent guest on Capital Region TV and radio, he's written for the New York Times, and he's been featured several times on CBS News. He's presented at numerous state and national conferences, and I'm pleased to welcome Matthew Shapiro.
Thank you so much, Rena. Wow, I'm a little embarrassed having such a distinguished panel and you go into my bio so deep, but thank you. It's always good to be with you, Rena, and you've been such a leader in our field for so long, and so grateful for your vision and leadership, and so grateful for this amazing panel that we have. I don't want to say too much. I know no one's here to see me. I'm just so honored to be in this company with my friend Congressman Kennedy and these great writers here. And I just want to say, NAMI New York State, we're the grassroots, the New York State chapter of NAMI, the leading grassroots organization in the country, dedicated to improving the lives of individuals and families impacted by mental illness. And our vision is to create a world where people with mental illness can live happy and productive lives, supported by communities that care. And if we want to create those communities that care, we need to lead by example. We need to be the light that we want to see in the world. And the best way we can do that is to share our stories. By sharing our stories and sharing our truths, we get to put a face on mental health and why the services and the supports that we need are so important. So to Congressman Kennedy and to Stephen and Jonathan, who have put out this tremendous book on courage. And really, we know that telling our stories are difficult, our stories are painful and challenging. But when we have the platform like we're given with Profiles in Mental Health Courage to tell our stories, we could take all of our negative experiences and the pain that we've had and use it as a gift to let people know that they're not alone, to let people know that there are people out there fighting for them, that, when you have a mental illness, it's so easy to feel isolated and invisible. And like I said, by telling our stories, we shine a light. So, I hope this discussion tonight and the brave people featured in the book really inspire you to go out there and share your story and share your truth. And that's how we create the communities we want to see, and the communities that are rooted in kindness and support, and the kind of communities we now need more than ever. So I hope tonight really inspires you. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us tonight. And I'll turn it back over to Beth. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Matt. As Matt said, I'm Beth Duboff, the Executive Director of NAMI Rockland. We're proud to join with our other sponsors, the Friends of the Finkelstein Library and NAMI New York State, to present tonight's program, Profiles in Mental Health Coverage. Did you know that 23% of Americans in the United States experienced a mental illness in the past year, which is about 60 million people? Maybe you or your child or your parent or spouse. As tonight's program will show, mental illness has no demographic, no face. It is almost 1/4 of our population. While some seek help, others are reluctant. So organizations like NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, provide peer support, education, and advocacy to help end the stigma and hopefully share resources and motivation to those who feel they are alone. We provide the helpline to allow people to gain information or speak to a friendly voice, a person who has shared experience with mental health issues. We encourage people and their families to seek the support they need to live their best life. Most of the time, that first step is the hardest. It takes unimaginable courage, but as playwright August Wilson said, confront the dark parts of yourself and work to banish them with illumination and forgiveness. Your willingness to wrestle with your demons will cause your angels to sing. Tonight, our program will share some examples of people who did just that. If you are new to NAMI, please take the time to visit our website at www.namirockland.org and learn how we can help you and your loved ones. If you know somebody who may need some courage, have them call our helpline at 845-359-8787. I'm happy to introduce Stephen Freed and Patrick Kennedy to begin our program.
Thank you so much for the great introduction. Patrick and I are thrilled to be here. It's a special event because it was also organized by people who helped organize the book. I mean, John Eig was one of the first people that we talked to about the book, who helped us with the book. So it's great to be able to speak to NAMI New York and NAMI Rockland. I will say that it seems like a good time to have a conversation that isn't about politics. So that's one of the things that we really tried to do in this book. I mean, Patrick and I worked on a previous book, Common Struggle, which was very much about his journey and about the politics of mental health. But in 2021, when we talked about doing this book, our goal was really to do something completely different, which was to do a book that really just showed what it was like to have mental illness, what it was like to have substance use disorder, what it was like for families who were struggling with the losses from suicide and overdose. And to not, the politics would be obvious from reading the stories, but that the stories would be about the people. And our biggest goal was to make sure that we would find people who would use their real names and tell their real stories. And I'll tell you that it took us 2 years and hundreds of pre-interviews to get 12 amazing people who would do that. It's still very stigmatized, unfortunately, for people to tell their stories. But one of our biggest goals was, we were interested in mental health parity for the laws, but we're also interested in parity of compassion, parity of understanding. And that's really what the goal of this book was. And also to recast the struggles of these illnesses as courage, which is why we used Profiles of Mental Health Courage, a title that obviously comes very much from Patrick's family's tradition. And we're just really thrilled to be able to share 2 of the stories tonight. Before we do, I want to have Patrick say a few words about the book. And hi, Patrick.
Hey, Stephen. Thanks so much. And to Raina, and thank you, Matt, really setting the stage for this the way you did. And thank you for your leadership at NAMI. NAMI is just such a source of support for families that are so in desperate need for information and experience and how to navigate this space, and does such a great job in so many ways. Thank you so much for your work at NAMI. And obviously, Jonathan, thank you so much for your help with this book, and obviously look forward to hearing from you and of course, Miss Dreher, Tonie Dreher, who has just been, what a wonderful, courageous person she has been in her storytelling. And I think everybody will hopefully be able to take something out of this book that they can use to help others. Like Matt said, I think the purpose of this book is to reduce the sense of isolation that often accompanies suffering from one of these illnesses. And if people can feel like they're not unique, that there are others that are trying to grapple with the complexity, the messiness of trying to fight with an illness while also fight for medical care for that illness, that's often not appropriate, and it's often not reimbursed, and often filled with all kinds of other obstacles, while they're also trying to hold a job or get a job or maintain a family relationship or cope with the family relationship that they lost because of the illness. These are all the aspects of these stories that I have found in my experience aren't often told. And I was so honored that Stephen has agreed to be the co-pilot on writing this book, because he did such a fantastic job with my first book, A Common Struggle. And I knew when I shared the common struggle with others who were thinking about whether they were going to participate, that they would be much more inclined to help us with this book, as difficult as it is for people to tell their story, because of the way that Stephen has so elegantly begun to explain how we talk about this story in a way that is, non-salacious, non-stigmatizing, or traumatizing, that it really is a way that we can all learn how to tell these stories, because I don't think people have a whole lot of experience knowing how to tell these stories. And Stephen's definitely made a life of really focusing in this particular space, particularly among many other areas that he's done a great deal of writing. This is an area where he's really developed a special acumen. So Stephen, thank you for your ability to weave the narrative. I was fortunate just to be a convener and in some cases an interviewer and a supporter for people to be part of this book. But Stephen deserves all the credit for his writing, which I think everyone will appreciate once they get into the book.
Well, thanks. It's very nice of you to say. The thing that I will say in general, besides what I did for this book, I mean, what I would love to inspire is people to take their lived experience more seriously as something to explore. I think that everybody in this book had an idea of what their lived experience was before they started talking to us. And then we asked them lots of questions, some of which they hadn't thought of, some of which they couldn't remember. And we asked for people we could interview their family members, their clinicians, look at their medical records. And I think a lot of people, many of whom are struggling, felt that it was good to have a different version of their lived experience. So for people who are in recovery, people who are being treated for mental illness, I would say there's another level of that you might want to think about. But again, enough. Let's talk about the book. Let's talk to John and to Tonie. So Jonathan is here speaking to us tonight because Bob Kazel, who was the person that we profiled on the book, who John introduced us to, unfortunately is not feeling well enough to have a conversation. So Bob and Tonie's stories are real different from each other. Our goal in this book was for you to meet people of all ages, all races, all genders, all socioeconomic classes, and we ignored the boundaries between mental illness and addiction, the boundaries between a lot of areas, because when you have these illnesses, you can't deal with those boundaries. You have to get the help that you need for all the symptoms that you have. So John's going to talk a little bit about his friend Bob, who he introduced me to. I'm a journalist. Bob is a journalist. Bob and I started in journalism not in a different time, and Bob has periodically had to struggle with bipolar disorder, which he actually treated quite well. But what people don't often talk about, because we're so focused on getting people to be diagnosed and treated in the first place, is that Bob is somebody who was treated successfully, but his symptoms came back. He had breakthrough symptoms. He had to be rehospitalized. But he's had sort of an amazing story of always coming back from his illness to do important things. So, and his friendship with John is really fascinating to me. And one of the things we tried very much to do in this book is not just show people in isolation, but to show them with the people who take care of them and the people who are there with them. So, John, it's great to see you. It's nice for you to be out talking about something besides Martin Luther King, I think. And you really inspired Patrick and I when you told us about Bob and encouraged us to write about him. So why don't you talk a little bit about your friendship with him and about Bob and about Bob's journey?
Yeah, and I'm honored to be here with you all and speaking on Bob's behalf. And Bob, if you're listening, and I know you might be listening, feel free to chime in and correct me if I get anything wrong. Bob is one of my best friends in the world. And when I heard about this book and Stephen told me about it, I said, you've got to get Bob in there. His story is one of the most inspiring stories, and he's one of the most heroic people I've ever met. And I'm not just saying that because he's probably listening. It's true. So we worked at the school paper together. We were classmates at Northwestern, and Bob was, I think it's safe to say, the shining star of our class. He was just a brilliant writer. And when we graduated, he did not go to his job as expected. And I began getting letters from him explaining that he was having stomach problems and he wasn't sure when he was going to be able to start the job. And this went on for a while, and it was very strange until finally he sent me a letter. And I have it's you quoted in your book, and I'm just going to read what he wrote. This was on July 23rd, 1986. He wrote to me, "The truth is, I've been bullshitting you about why I'm here. The bald truth, John, is that I'm at the tail end of a 2.5-week stay in Evanston Hospital's intensive care psych ward. I'm a manic depressive. I don't know your knowledge of that. You might be summoning up images of knife-wielding lunatics who steal babies or eat them or worse, but you're more hip, certainly. So I can't imagine you're being freaked out by a concept like mental illness. I imagine you might be intrigued, actually." And I was intrigued. I wanted to know what that meant. I wanted to know how the brain worked. I wanted to know why this happened to Bob and why it happened now, and if it had ever happened before. And we began this long correspondence. And this was back in the days of snail mail. So I'd write a letter, a long, 5 or 6 page letter, and wait for Bob's response. And it really changed the nature of our friendship. We were friends at Northwestern, but obviously we'd never shared our deepest secrets. He didn't tell me that he'd missed a year of school because he'd had an earlier episode where he was hospitalized. He didn't tell me until much later that he was gay too. These are things that I think came about from the fact that he trusted me with his story at that point. And as I watched him get better and go back to work, he eventually got a job in New Orleans where I was working. So we became even closer. And then I moved back to Chicago a few years later, and he was in Chicago, and we became a part of each other's families. His mother would bake mandel bread for us, for my family on the holidays, and we would invite them to our house for Thanksgiving or for other events. And throughout all of this time, there were ups and downs. I don't know exactly, but it seemed like every 5 years or so, even though Bob was being treated for his bipolar disorder and he was treated well and responded well, there would be these recurrences where he would end up struggling, sometimes back in the hospital, sometimes losing his job. And it was just a real challenge, but it was also just a real inspiration to see how he coped with this and how he went about not just educating me, but educating other people in his life and speaking more openly about it over the years. And with his mother, actually joining an organization that helped raise awareness on mental health issues. So I was just, and this is one of the things I love about this book, is that what we're getting here are these intimate portraits of families, of friendships. You do such a beautiful job in this book. And that's how I ended up being a part of the story. I hadn't intended to. When I suggested Bob as a chapter in your book, I certainly didn't think I was going to be in there. But that's one of the things that makes this book so moving, is that you really provide these nuanced portraits of not just how the mental health issues affect the individual, but how it ripples and affects the people around them, and how the communities around them can be so supportive. So I love that about the book.
Can you talk a little bit about one of the things, many of the things you guys talked about were really fascinating to me. One of them that I think would be interesting for people was you talked about when Bob would get manic and psychotic, that you initially tried to sort of talk him out of it. That you both had gone to college together. This was maybe like an intellectual thing that you could figure out and help him with. And I wonder what your learning curve was for that, and if you later developed any kind of shorthand to know when somebody was sick, or and how that works.
Yeah, I not only saved all these letters that Bob wrote me, but I took notes on our conversations, because I was often sitting at my desk at the newspaper with a a legal pad on the desk, and Bob would call me from the hospital or call me from his home, or sometimes call me from a bar, and I would take notes, and he would say things that were fascinating to me. I was trying to understand how his mind was working, and in the beginning I would argue with him because he would say that he spoke to God, and that God had told him that I was going to be happy, and that I was going to, or that, and I would say, Bob, come on, you're not really speaking to God. This is, that's not what's really happening. It's just in your head. And he would argue with me that, no, you don't understand. This is real. And I was just trying to grapple with it. I was just trying to figure out how he could be so certain of these things at the same time that, to me, seemed preposterous.
I also thought one of the things, Bob is one of the characters in the book who talked in great length about what it was like to lose his career, what it was like to have to be on disability, and he had to go on disability when he was 40 years old, because of the recurrence of his illness and because he was having later problems that come from using lithium. But yet the way he talked about it, and the way he's talked about the last 20 years of his life, when he couldn't work full time anymore, is, I think, something that one rarely gets to read, about what it's like to have these illnesses, but in fact is actually obviously a very important part of many people's lives. So I mean, I wonder what that relationship has been like for you and for the two of you. I know we were very moved by it, even though, look, he couldn't join us because he was ill. He's living in a nursing home because he needs dialysis 3 times a week. It's not where he wants to be necessarily, but he's still a powerful voice. I'm really proud of what he was able to do, but I think it's really interesting to have 2 friends that have been through all the things that you guys have been through, besides the symptoms issues.
Yeah, and this is why I say he's a hero to me, because at first it was just a temporary setback in his career. He'd lose a job because he was hospitalized, and then he'd have to take a year or 2 to get back into another job, and it's often lower, in a lower position than he was when when he left his previous job. And he would take jobs that were not as high paying, not as rewarding, but he would work his way back over and over again. And when it became impossible really to continue to find work, he began freelancing, or he began writing virtually for free for anti-nuclear magazines because he believed strongly in the cause. And then he began volunteering, teaching English as a second language to immigrants because he wanted to be useful, and he wanted to do something constructive with his time. And even now, as you mentioned, he's getting dialysis 3 times a week. He's living in this nursing home. He's judging student newspaper contests for these journalism organizations around the country. He continues, and not to mention the fact that he remains like a loving part of our family. He's just continues to contribute, and doing this from unbelievably difficult circumstances where I probably by now would have just tossed in my chips and watched Netflix 24/7.
Well, thank you. We're going to take some questions to both of you, but I want to move over and talk to Tonie a little bit. So Miss Tonie came to us a different way. I'm friends with Dr. Elizabeth Ford at Columbia, who's one of the leading experts on mental health in prisons and jails. And when we told her we were working on this book, she said, I have somebody who would be unbelievable for you. I don't know if she'll talk to you or not, but if she would, it would be amazing. And then we met Miss Tonie. And Miss Tonie, besides the fact that in her current job helps take care of the people who she once was, is just an incredible spokesperson, not only for so many aspects of mental illness and addiction, so many aspects of the problems, especially in communities of color, and she's really amazing at dealing with all these issues. And I have to say that since the book came out, she's been interviewed a lot of places because people can tell that she has a lot to say. But Tonie, why don't you first start out just telling everybody a little bit about how you grew up and how mental illness and addiction sort of found their way into your life, and then how you got to where you are here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I grew up in the South. I grew up in South Carolina. And I grew up in a very abusive household. I grew up just abused mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually. I was an abused child. My first boyfriend, my first consensual boyfriend was 35 and I was 15. But he saved my life because he moved me out of my mom's house, right? He put me in my own place. I grew up raising my little brothers. I was an adult before being an adult. And by the time that I was 19, I already had 3 children. So my life was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. And fast forwarding through, I hear people sometimes since the book came out telling me that my story is sad. And I say, yeah, it's a sad beginning, but what would be sadder if I knew something and didn't say something, right? I became involved with drugs in my 20s. It was just a way for me to cope. I didn't know anything about mental illness. I just thought that it was an escape. It was just a great escape for me. And with the addiction came more children. I think that my total count of children, maybe 13. I'm not sure. I've been very open and honest about that in the book. I'm in the process of looking for my children, the children that I do know I have great relationships with. And I am currently working in a position where I get to mentor individuals that are exactly like me. And it's something that I love doing every single day because I was a person that had to suffer in silence with molestation, with addiction, with just being me. I had to suffer. I didn't know anything about mental illness, to say the least. I didn't know anything about mental illness. I didn't know that there was an issue with me. I met my therapist, who's still my therapist, Paul, and he was the first person that began to shed some light on me. Once I got diagnoses.
Explain how you met him, because it's such a random thing for somebody who has made such a big impact in your life.
Yes. I met Paul because I wanted to apply for Social Security. And they told me that I was in it. I couldn't work. I couldn't work. I still didn't know that I was suffering from mental illness. I just thought that it was addiction. I found out that I had some heart issues. But to make a long story short, I had to go and apply, but I had to meet with the therapist first. And I met with this man, and this little man comes out, this little white man comes out. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what is this man going to be able to tell me about myself that I don't know? Because growing up in the South, we were taught to fear white people. White people were not someone that we would go around. And I met this man only because I wanted to apply for Social Security. And he ended up being the catalyst for changing my life. I still have therapy every Wednesday at 10:30 with this man. And he is so amazing because he now allows me. I still have moments when my days are not good, but he allows me to put a name on it and call it out for what it is, right? I put boundaries in place for people that don't have my best interest at heart. I was able to build a relationship with my mom, but because I stayed in therapy for so long. Everyone has a boundary in my life. And so this man was the changing point of my life for myself.
It's really interesting. One of the things I would love for you to talk about, there are these very artificial boundaries between the world of substance use disorder and the world of mental illness. And you got caught in the middle of that, right? So you lived in a world where you were addicted to drugs, and people told you that your problem was you were addicted to drugs. No one for years and years and years suggested that you had a psychiatric illness and that you were having hallucinations and stuff like that. Whenever you had them, they assumed it was because of drugs. This is a theme we heard so many times through the book. And while, Patrick's advocacy has always been to take away these barriers between mental illness and addiction because they're false And the people who live in the real world don't really want them to be there because they don't help you. I remember you telling us just about your revelation that your drug use wasn't only because you were addicted to drugs, but because you were having symptoms that wouldn't go away even when you weren't using drugs.
Whew. That is a big one because I see it so much even in my work today. People believe that you can actually separate the substance abuse from the mental illness, and you can never address one without addressing the other, right? So when I was using, yes, I used to be very symptomatic all the time. I even know the word for it now. It's symptomatic, right? Because I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. After the whole run and everything was said and done, the voices that I would hear in my head, the people that I would see that no one else could see, I found out that I suffered with schizophrenia. And everyone just thought that I was a drug addict. Yes, I was a drug addict, but it was so much more than that. And even now today, I see people that will allow insurance companies. You make a person choose whether or not they're going to address addiction or if they're going to address the mental illness. You can't address one without addressing the other. This is a fact. This is a fact. This is a fact, right? So they have the micro programs, but they don't tell you the bureaucratic bull that you have to go through to get into the program, right? They don't tell you any of that. I literally thought that I was just out of my mind. Okay, I'm getting high. So everything that's happening and I'm stuck in the corner. I can't move and I'm paranoid and everybody's saying, oh, it's from the coke. It's from the cocaine. And as it turned out, it wasn't just that. It was literally something wrong with my brain. And
one thing I remember, go ahead.
I'm an advocate for mental health because I never want anyone to suffer the way that I had to suffer. I will never keep my mouth closed when it comes down to making effective, positive change because I never want anyone to suffer the way that I had to suffer.
Can you talk a little bit about what you recognize as the unusual challenges in the African American community? You talked a lot about that and about just even the idea of mental health being something that it's sometimes difficult for you to explain to the people you're counseling because they just kind of don't believe it.
Well, in my community, people think that you can take an aspirin and get over it. In my community, you're just told to deal with it. In my community, there's nothing wrong with you. And there's something that's not going to be talked about in my community. So I go back into my community, the same community that I use drugs in. I did an interview with Michelle from CBS Morning News Saturday morning, and the whole community swarmed around because they wanted to know what was happening. And when they listened to me talking about mental health, I go back into my community and I take people into the clinic to sign them up for mental health treatment. Because yes, it happens in the Black communities. We just throw a rug over it and act like it doesn't exist. I'm here as a powerhouse to say that it exists. It exists and there's nothing wrong with being diagnosed. Right now, I'm going through a situation with my stepdaughter. Her father and I are no longer together, but she's struggling with mental illness. She thinks that if she smokes a joint, like everything will be okay. But she's scared. She's stuck in the window. She can't come outside. Everything is troubling her. And I'm saying to her, do you remember when you were going with me to see Paul? Because I used to take them with me. And she says, yes. And I would bring it back to her. There's nothing wrong with not being okay. The problem comes in when you don't address not being okay. So I go back into the communities. The same people that saw me messed up in my addiction, sleeping on the park bench, are the same people that I go and I counsel to. It's not just my job. I go into communities. My children, as I said, I have relationships with my children now. One of the first things that I said to my children when we reconnected was that I need you to get yourself a mental health therapist because there are going to be some things that come up in you. And if you have to talk about me, it's okay because I'm a part of the problem. I'm a part of the reason that you're the way that you are. I need you to take care of that. My son is 33. He's in the United States Army. He called me last month and he said, Mom, I started talking to someone. And I said, well, who are you talking to? He says, Mom, I started with my priest in the military. And I've been talking to a therapist. I almost died. I'm so happy because Stephen and I have spoken about my son. I'm so excited that my children are following. They watch me. I live by example. I heard someone say, be the change that you want people to aspire to be. That's what I am. I am the change that I want people to aspire to be. I came from a broke down piece of nothing because that's what I was called my whole life. Excuse my French. You ain't shit. You ain't ever gonna be shit. You're never gonna amount to anything. This little child that was never going to amount to anything has been on the same job consistently for 9 years, my second job for 7 years. I'm currently enrolled in college where I hold a 4.0 GPA. I turned out to be shit. I'm the shit in real life, right? I am the shit in real life. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. Never. Never. And it's so great to hear you say this. And I mean, one of the things that has been amazing about this book is that, you know, we were with a lot of the people in the book for well over a year, in some cases 2 years. So, you know, I remember when you weren't talking to your mom. And I remember when you reconnected with some of your kids. It's such a privilege to see. And the thing that I especially love about your chapter in the book and the way you talk about this is that you don't try to get out of anything that you did. The way you own everything in a way that's positive without asking anybody to forgive you, I think is such an essential thing to learn. And you know, these illnesses are messy. And one of the things that I think Patrick and I are so honored to be able to show in these chapters is how messy they are. Too much writing about mental illness and addiction tries to make it not messy. If you just do this, it'll all be okay. That's an interesting message and a useful message. But if you really want to know and you really want to be there for people in your life, you have to be able to deal with the idea that they're going to get worse again, maybe for no reason. And you have to be able to accept that and deal with that. You've been that way with your kids, John and Bob, in terms of their friendship. Other people in the book, people who are married, who are dealing with those marital relationships, even the relationships between patients and their docs, and their therapists who have to, you know, stick with them during rough times. So, you know, what we really hoped was that we would be able to show the real world. And I don't know, I don't think this book's depressing at all. I think that there are very tough things in it, but they are real. And the people who are talking about them are talking about them powerfully and trying to show people how to deal with them. And one of the biggest takeaways, I think, for people is to understand that the illness is their enemy and not each other. And to always be able to remind themselves to understand the illness, to understand what they are about, and to, you know, to try to keep you and the people who you love in your life on the same side, even if it's tough. And I think that in Tonie, in so many ways, you just told us stories that just showed it's an ongoing thing. How do you tell people, I don't know how many kids I had, but I want to find out and I want to be here. I want to be there for them. That is the real world of this. And one of the things that I know we've talked a lot about is something that no one ever talks about, which is reproductive rights issues for women who have mental illness and addiction. These issues have to do with birth control. They have to do with access to abortion. They have to do with access to information about your kids that you've had who the system took away because you weren't well at the time. And these are all issues that we need to focus on too. So I thank you, and I thank Bob and John for being so open. I want to see if we have some questions in the chat from the audience. Maria, do we have some questions?
We do not have any questions yet. We have a lot of thank yous and folks that are incredibly inspired by all of you.
That's what happens when Tonie talks. No one else wants to talk. No, Patrick and I have seen it in a lot of different settings, you know. So I would love.
But if
you know,
anybody does have questions, please feel free, drop them into the Q&A or the chat, and we will get to them.
I'll just say,
go ahead, Patrick.
Miss Tonie, like, you're such a powerful example that, you know, we don't have to be the story. of our illness. Like, we are more than that story. And it's so evident. You're such a good model for that, as you said. It's also really powerful to think about the spiritual dimension of all this, because you are making such an difference in all the lives of women that you're counseling who, I used to have someone in my office who ran my constituent services when I was in the Congress, and she had many, many types of disabilities. And everybody that came to the office obviously had very big story to tell. And she'd always kind of surprise them and disarm them, because she would walk around the desk and then they would see how many physical challenges she was coping with. And it immediately bonded her to the people who were there with their own stories. Your story allows people who think that they're unique, they've had it the worst, or they're not going to share what they're going to share because it's too shaming. You light the room with the fact that they're not alone and that you're taking your own experience to help others. We, in recovery, for myself, it's the way we survive, is by helping others, that next person who's suffering. And it's, you think about this country's challenges today, the people that 30 million people who are in recovery just from addiction, not including other mental illnesses, have so much to offer to help us address the challenges that exist amongst so many other millions of Americans. And we don't think about how can we really leverage the lived experience of so many to help others. Yes, we're seeing a growth in peer support, but you're the best testament for the power of that idea of peer support that I've seen. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I think that when people meet me, they don't know what to expect. And I think that when it comes down to getting a person to open up, it's about full transparency for me, because a person that does not trust you is not going to talk to you. They can be going through anything. They're not, there's no trust, there's no conversation. So I disarm a person when they walk into my office. It's my responsibility, right? It's my responsibility. And I say to people all the time, if you want recovery, it's obtainable from mental health and from addiction. If you want recovery, it's attainable. You have to do the work, right? I'm not going to do the work for you. I'm going to be the passenger in your seat. You're going to be the driver of your own car, and we're going to ride until the wheels fall off. And I do it with intention. It's my intention to show people that if you have someone that you can trust in to move your life forward, you don't have to stay stuck.
And I would say, we want this book to be a testament to the power of just telling the truth.
Yes.
That you can tell the truth about your story and your life doesn't have to blow up. And in fact, all the things that you're trying to hide because you think if people knew them, it would be worse. I think that people have found, honestly, that people knowing their story has made it better.
Yeah.
And somebody actually asked Tonie how people, now that you shared your story, I mean, if they has anybody said, like, how could you do this? Like, what did your mom say, or what did people say? Have they all been encouraging for you? Open. I mean, you shared at a very heavy level.
Funny thing. So, my mom still has not said anything about the book.
Uh-huh.
She knows about the book. My brothers have read the book. She knows about the book. Conviction is something else, right? But I meet my mom where she is, exactly like I meet my clients where they are. I respect the fact that you still live your life in denial, but I absolutely will not allow you to make me live mine in denial anymore. You don't have that power anymore, right?
Yeah.
The power of forgiveness is something else, right? I have forgiven my mom. And this is how I'm able to deal with my mom. Because if I allow you to still keep me stuck in the years when I was a child, not being able to fend or fight for myself, might not be so good. I still have days, right, where I go to New York, I go to work, I come home, and I have to cry to my brother or cry to my sister because my feelings have been hurt, because I've been with my mom for the last 2 weeks. And sometimes my mind clicks on and I think about some of the old stuff and still how ungrateful you are, right? And I come and I cry my heart out. And once I'm done with the crying, I move on. I'm back in New York in 2 weeks and I'm doing it all over again, right? I'm never going to disrespect my mom. I'm never going to try to make her be someplace that she's not willing to be. I'm going to respect, honor, and meet her exactly where she is. I'm a firm believer in the Bible, right? I don't want to get spiritual or religious, but I know that the Bible dictates to me how I'm supposed to treat my mom, right? It's not about what my mom has done to me. She's allowed to see me living my best life. And for me, that's enough. It used to be where I wanted my mom to love and respect me because I made it. I'm no longer in the streets getting high. I'm no longer, I just want her to be able to love me and be proud of something that I've done. I'm at the point where I don't care. I have grandchildren, have children that love me, and that's enough for me for right now, right? When I talk to my clients, they're very receptive to who I am. Because again, I'm not the only person that has gone through my story. And I found that there are many me's out there. And it's not just women, it's also men, right? So we don't want to leave the men out, because the men can't carry a child doesn't mean that they're not parents to a child somewhere that they've lost track of in the system because of addiction, because of mental illness. Men suffer too, right? And so I can walk into a room in my office. When I'm in New York for the 2 weeks that I work, everybody wants to talk to me. I don't see my computer until the end of the day and the next morning, because when I'm in the building, it's about honesty. If I can be honest, it opens up the door for someone else to walk in and say, you know, Miss Tonie, that happened to me. Can I talk to you? Absolutely. I can meet a stranger on the street and they're going through something. I'll give them my card. Listen, give me a call. I answer my phone. If I don't get you, I'll call you back, because this is about, in the rooms, right? One addict helping another. So why is it not the same for mental health? For me, it's all the same. They all go hand in hand.
I agree. I agree. John, we had a question. They wanted to know if you ever, I think this may be the wrong word, but did you ever question your friendship with Bob? Did you ever feel that you didn't have the tools and understanding to help and support him? And I know we did talk about this a little bit, so can you talk about that a little? And can you unmute? Can you unmute?
So sorry. There were lots of times where I felt like I didn't have the patience. You know, when Bob was manic, and he'd call my house, you know, every hour or every 10 minutes at 2 in the morning and 3 in the morning, and we had little kids at home trying to get some sleep. Sometimes I just unplugged the phones. I couldn't do it anymore. You know, I just couldn't, and I didn't feel like I knew what to do. I didn't feel like I could help. I felt like he wasn't going to listen to anything I said anyway. And I just didn't know what to do at times. I would call his mom, but she passed away. And then there was really no one else. And I became the, you know, sometimes the main outlet for him. So yeah, there were lots of times where I felt ill-equipped, or, you know, just unsure what to do. And like I said before, sometimes it was, you know, trying to convince him that he needed help, that he needed to go back to see the doctor, that he needed to go to the hospital, and couldn't get through to him, couldn't get him to listen. And try not to take that personally. You know, sometimes I felt like it just wore me down, and then I felt like I was being a bad friend for not taking his calls. It was hard. It was really hard. But eventually, you know, he'd end up in the hospital one way or the other, and then it would be this slow recovery, and I would go and visit him and bring him food and bring him clothes, and just you know, slowly reconnect every time.
Well, it's, you know, look, I mean, part of our goal in the book was to look at these kinds of relationships. I mean, the idea of how you deal with mother-child friend relationships, how you deal with friendships, you know, the processes of these are things that I just don't think we talk enough about. We talk about diagnosis, we talk about medication, you know, we don't talk about the processes of just interpersonal relationships. And I love the conversations that we had about Bob, and that Bob had with us about you. I remember you telling us that, when you went out to buy him t-shirts at Target, you had to be careful not to get t-shirts with certain things on it that you thought might trigger his delusions. So you got him sports things because he didn't care about sports, but if you got him Star Trek stuff, there were times when he was psychotic that he thought he was, in Star Trek. And you also told an amazing story that I just think, touched me so much. And if you could tell it, you told us a story about when Bob was in the hospital and you went to visit him, and while you were there, you saw somebody else there. And I wish you would tell that story because I know it just moved Patrick and I so much.
Yeah, I'll never forget this. Bob was at the hospital just 5 or 6 blocks from where I live, and I would go over there at least a couple times a week and bring him a milkshake from our favorite, his favorite milkshake place in the neighborhood. And I'd bring him something to read or change of clothes. And I'd just sit with him and keep him company for a while. And one day, across the room in the TV area, I spotted someone I recognized from the playground where my kids went to school. It was a mom of one of my daughter's classmates. And I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should say hello. I didn't know if she'd be embarrassed to see me. And then I went to the elevator when I was leaving, and her husband was in the elevator. And
she was a patient.
She was a patient, right? And her husband was there visiting. And I felt nervous, like I didn't want him to think that this was some kind of a, that he should be stigmatized or anything. And I just said, hey, if you ever want to talk, I hope your wife's doing okay, and my friend's here too. And if you need anything, give me a call. And we talked about it a few times on the playground, and he would just let me know how things were going. And it was really, it was just a powerful experience to me because it reminded me once again that this isn't so unusual. That there's a lot of folks out there, and there's probably a lot of folks out there, but you don't know what they're going through.
There's one more question here, Tonie. Someone asked, how do you help someone who doesn't want to be helped?
You just be there to support them when they're ready for the help. I mean, you can't force a person to be somewhere where they're not ready to be, right? And that's the whole concept that we say, meeting a person where they at, right? I meet people right where they are, but I show up for them the exact same way the first time or the 100th time, because it's about me respecting that person's dignity and right to fail. And when they're ready, they already know that they can come back to me with a non-judgmental person. I'm not going to be someone that's going to judge you because you didn't make it the first time. I'm not going to be someone to judge you because you didn't make it the 50th time. I meet that person exactly where they are. And when they're ready to go, I'm going to be there to support them.
Do you remember being a person who didn't want to be helped?
I was a person that didn't know I needed help. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So, but it's the same thing, right?
It's the same concept. It's the same concept. I can see someone asked, how does me sharing or someone sharing with me, how does that support my recovery? It lets me know what I would never want to do again, right? Because I see people in different stages of addiction. I see people in different stages of mental health. When I'm full, right? I have an outlet. The individuals that I service, there's no outlet yet because they don't know that in order to put good things in, you have to get the bad things out, right? That's what your mental health, the things that kept me stuck in life was the traumas that I suffered as a young child, right? It kept me stuck. Once I started to get rid of the garbage, I was able to put good things in, right? So now I don't allow garbage to go into my system. One thing that's happened, I went to treatment March of 2009. I have not gone back. I had one relapse and I went to the psych ward because I had to be crazy to get 6 months of recovery from substances underneath my belt and go back out and use.
So, but you were somebody with schizophrenia who has had good insight into your illness since somebody explained it to you.
Yes.
Obviously, there are many families who are in NAMI who have family members who don't yet have that insight. And I wonder if either in your work in cases or just in your time in the prisons or the work you do with Elizabeth, that population is a different population. And I wonder if you have advice for people on how to make those approaches.
I just would have to say that to make the first of all, when you're suffering with mental illness, you feel when you're being judged. We know judgment.
You feel you're
when we
being
see
judged.
it.
Okay. Uh-huh.
We know judgment when we see it. Going and treating people with the utmost dignity and respect, no matter what the situation, not trying to force change on a person, being there unconditionally to support that person is where I come from, right? That's the suggestion that I would make to family members.
It's hard.
Understanding.
It's hard to be unconditional, right?
Educate yourself about the illness. Educate yourself about the substance abuse. They have family support groups out there now that you can educate yourself. Education is key, but do it from a non-judgmental standpoint. Nobody wants to be judged. We're already stigmatized enough. When I found out that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, oh my God, I wanted to die. Like, oh, that's the worst ever. That's the worst thing ever. But it's really not that bad. Once I educated myself on it, it's really not. There are things that I have to do. I like when Patrick says, if you have cancer, you're going to treat it. I have something and I treat it. For family members, get the support that you need for yourself. So friends, family, loved ones, get the support that you need for yourself so that you can better be able to support the person that you love.
Are there any other questions? We've gone over our time, but as both John and Tony know, I will sit and ask them questions until midnight if somebody doesn't stop me. Patrick knows it too. Patrick, go ahead.
Stephen, you know what is some of the most remarkable stories in this book are the people who are in the lives of those who are suffering from these illnesses. When we talk to spouses and their unconditional love, to your point, Tony, it's unbelievable because I don't think people know that there are people like Ms. Tonie who just are loving unconditionally. I mean, we all have our own jaded view of this whole world and our our implicit biases because we don't have any perspective. But when you read this book, the number of spouses or children or siblings who are like completely loving with that illness being present, it's pretty amazing because this is a discard culture where you don't have worth here, then you're kind of shunted aside. I've seen that my whole life in politics, the relative value of people as human beings being determined by a whole lot of outside characteristics. And obviously in this world, mental illness is one of the big disqualifiers of value that we know of. And that's why we step over our fellows on the streets. That's why we incarcerate people at record rates when it's really because of their untreated mental illness. How in the world we accept this as a nation? And given the fact we are, even though it's changing in terms of our faith traditions and the adherence to any kind of quote organized religion, it is remarkable for a country that likes to think of itself as godly, that we treat our sisters and brothers in such a way as to deny their spark of divinity, which for those of us who really believe that we're all children of God is so reprehensible to the whole notion of being part of a family. So anyway, I think in my little political spiel, that cultural shift, I've spent my life working on legislative shifts to make sure these illnesses are reimbursed, that the obstacles are removed, that we get the things that we need to have put in place, especially prevention and so forth. But it's that cultural idea that it's all right to treat people like we've treated them. That's a societal, accepted value that we're doing this. So if we want to get the money, we want to break the logjam, we want to get change made. I try to think of all these political solutions, but at the end of the day, it's like Miss Tonie says, it's a heart solution. It's a cultural, societal shift that we need, because if you don't have that, trying to advocate for, a system of dignity where we're not stepping over people or incarcerating them, why that's so hard is because we don't have that disposition towards our fellows who are suffering. That would then make that possible if we did have that. So,
and one of the ways we get that is to be more informed. I mean, I think, a lot of times in this book, people thought they were telling us stories that were completely unique to them, because no one ever said to them, yeah, that's what people who have your illness, that's what they go through. So we have in our generation lived through a time where people are no longer surprised by any aspect of cancer. They understand everything. Although, when I was growing up, Tony, when you were growing up, people still whispered about cancer. We talk about stigma being better, and maybe it is. I will be curious I'm going to ask you whether it is. Somebody asked about it. But while stigma might be better, I'm not sure people are better informed yet. I'm not sure how much they really know about the illnesses. I'm not sure they understand the medical model of addiction. I think this is still things that most people are like, really? So I think that there's still a lot to learn, and just saying that stigma is better, I hope it is. I don't know, Patrick. I mean, I don't have the illness. I mean, you guys do. Do you guys think that stigma is better? That the stigma situation is better than it was 5 or 10 years ago?
It is not.
it's not. I don't think.
One of the things that I say, and I say it often, and I say it without shame, is that mental health doesn't discriminate. Substance abuse is substances, they don't discriminate, right? So it's not a problem for people until it comes knocking on their door. Educate yourself. Educate yourself. It's not a problem until it's a problem for you. And for the people that think that stigma, you're walking around with blinders on. We turn a blind eye, like Patrick said, walking over people in the streets. I work in Harlem. I see it every day. You walk by people because we become so desensitized to a person, right? I've gotten out of an Uber because there was someone ODing on the sidewalk. I stopped the Uber driver and told him that I have to get out. I think it's one of my clients. And the Uber driver was kind. He waited for me. And I was with this gentleman for more than an hour while everyone else had their phones out recording. Someone is dying on the streets of Harlem, and your first thing that you think about is not taking out the phone to dial 911, but taking out the phone to record. We're so desensitized to someone else's problem. Why? Because it's not a problem that's knocking on your door yet.
Yeah.
And it's a yet.
Or if it is, you are ignoring it because people can't be open that they're dealing with it.
Those blinders.
I know. Listen,
In conclusion, Stephen and Jonathan, thank you so much for your part in all this effort. If you ever felt a sense of unease about the world that we're living in right now, and the seemingly kind of turning away from people and love and compassion, I will tell you, listening tonight gets me fired up, because just one person in you, Miss Tonie, has rekindled the fact that we can all be that light to others, and that as much as the world will tell us that to worry about everything else, if we just worry about ourselves and do what we can to help change the world, that's what's going to change it. And I am pumped every time we hang out, virtually or in person, by your story and your ability to tell that story so well and help make a difference. So anyway, I thank you again, and hope everybody is able to pick up the book, and we can continue this whole idea of advocacy. The back of the book has our QR code for our policy initiatives, and it's still a long fight. But thank you, NAMI. Love NAMI. Couldn't do it without you guys. And thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Bob. Wish we could have been here with us, but your story continues to inspire us. I hope you get a chance to read the book, and I hope you get a chance to talk to the people in your lives a little bit more in depth, because you got to hear Tony and Jonathan tonight. So thank you all so much. Thank you, NAMI, for the opportunity. And everybody have a good night.
Good night, everyone, and we want to
night.
thank you
Thank
all
you.
for joining us. It was a fascinating program. Anyone who'd like to access the book, we have it at the library. It's also available via many other outlets, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble. We want to thank our amazing panelists, Patrick Kennedy, Stephen Freed, Jonathan Eig, and Miss Tonie. This was a very uplifting program because we came together as a community and learned that we can be here for one another, and we are certainly not alone. So God bless you all for writing this book, for your continued passionate advocacy. We thank our sponsors, NAMI New York State and NAMI Rockland, for the incredible work you do in our community, in particular, Rena Finkelstein, Beth Bate-Duboff, Matt Shapiro, and Robert Schmelter. And let us remember that there are resources. There is community, and let's continue to shine that light and be the light for all around us. Good night, everyone, and thank you.